So today let's talk about selective anger, xenophobia, economic power, and the crisis of Pan-African contradiction in South Africa. South Africa stands on the blood sacrifice and the solidarity of Africa. During apartheid, African nations opened borders, funded liberation movements, trained exiles, sheltered activists, and carried the moral burden of supporting the anti-apartheid struggle. From frontline states to ordinary African citizens, the continent treated South Africa liberation as a continental mission. Today, one of the most uncomfortable questions facing modern South Africa is this: why does public anger so often target poor migrants instead of entrenched systems of economic inequality? Why is the street vendor from Zimbabwe, Somalia, Ethiopia, Malawi, Nigeria, or elsewhere treated as a threat, while historic concentrations of wealth and land ownership remain largely untouched? Why does xenophobia violence erupt more easily against struggling black Africans than against powerful corporate structures that dominate enormous sectors of the economy? These are not emotional questions. They are structural questions. Because facts reveal a painful contradiction. Many African migrants operate in survival economies. Small shops, transport labor, informal trade, low-income entrepreneurship, they are not the architect of historical economic inequality in Southern Africa. The deeper roots of economic injustice are older and more powerful. Colonial and land deposition, apartheid economic engineering, extreme wealth concentration, high unemployment, state corruption, a right capture, and unresolved structural inequality. Yet public frustration is repeatedly redirected downward toward vulnerable Africans instead of upward toward systems of power. That redirection is politically dangerous. Xenophobia becomes a distraction mechanism when government fails to resolve unemployment, house crisis, inequality, and corruption. Instead of confronting institutional failures, migrants become convenient scapegoats. And history warns us repeatedly: when societies normalize blaming vulnerable outsiders for internal dysfunction, democracy weakens and violence expands. Even more troubling is the selective moral outrage. South Africans rightly demand accountability on immigration, crime, governance, and economic hardship. Those concerns are legitimate in any sovereign nation, but consistency matters. Why does outrage against poor migrants often appear louder than outrage against corruption scandals involving political elites? Why are township shopkeepers easier targets than network of economic power protected by money, influence, and historical privilege? Why does anger mobilize faster against undocumented workers than against unresolved inequality inherited from apartheid structures? A nation serious about justice must confront all forms of injustice consistently, not selectively. The debate becomes even more explosive when allegations involving high-level financial misconduct emerge in public discourse. Questions surrounding hidden foreign currency, undeclared assets, and a right accountability have deeply shaken public trust in leadership and institutions in recent years. Citizens naturally ask, how does the state respond aggressively to vulnerable migrants, while political scandals involving immense sums of money generate slower institutional consequences? That contradiction fuels public cynicism. But the solution is not hatred. The solution is institutional honesty. South African crisis is not caused by African migrants alone. That narrative is economically shallow and politically convenient. The real crisis is a collision of historic inequality, youth unemployment, corruption, a right impunity, housing shortages, broken public trust, crime, and unfinished economic transformation decades after apartheid. And unless those structural realities are confronted honestly, xenophobia will continue functioning as emotional misdirection rather than national repair. Pan-Africanism was never supposed to mean silence about borders, law, and governance, but it also was never supposed to mean Africans treating fellow Africans as disposable enemies, while systems of concentrated power remain protected. The painful irony is this: apartheid divided black people to preserve systems of power. Modern xenophobia leads dividing Africans, while those same power structures remain economically dominant. That is the contradiction many citizens across Africa are now beginning to question openly. The future of South Africa cannot be built through fear of fellow Africans. It must be built through accountability, economic justice, constitutional order, anti-corruption reforms, and equal dignity under the law. Otherwise, the continent will continue watching a nation born from anti-oppression struggle slowly consume itself through selective anger and political destruction. And history will ask one devastating question: how did a country that inspired African liberations beginning turning into frustrations against Africa more aggressively than against inequality itself?